but it's obvious with the news from Pixar that we're going to talk about. They recognize that this is a failing business model, big time. And Inside Out 2, which we will talk about here in just a minute, I think it's the highest grossing movie of the year. I think it's
it is. Yeah. And it's the highest grossing animated movie in history.
Yeah. All because why, Ryan?
Because they didn't put any gay shit in it.
That's right.
And specifically went to every effort to make sure that even the freaks and weirdos out there who desperately try to find whatever might be queer coded to put their agenda on everything, they everything they could to give those people nothing. No hint. They didn't want to give parents any hint that there might be some gay shit in this kid's movie.
We are healing as a society. Inside Out 2 required edits to avoid LGBTQ themes. The edits included making the main character, Riley, appear less gay, as well as putting special care into making the relationship between Riley and Val seem as platonic as possible. A source describes it as just doing a lot of extra work to make sure that no one would potentially see them as straight. It's not straight. So, and like I said, I saw the movie once, and I said I liked it a lot, and I did. I was not expecting to like the movie as much as I did. It's not classic Pixar at all by any means, but it's definitely it was fine. It was fine. And of course, there was more than a few reports coming out yesterday about like Pixar and a lot of things that's been going on. As you know, Pixar's been in a bad way for the last 5 years, probably, or more. They have not been doing good.
One report that tackled a lot of different things. It was Pixar employees, maybe some current and former, but it was Pixar employees who came out to talk about the crunch, the layoffs, the atmosphere at Pixar, and of course that they were very upset that they weren't allowed to shove gay shit into this children's movie. I think that's a massive own from them, that the fact that they're complaining and bitching about it, and it went on to become the biggest animated movie of all time. I think it's just very ironic. But yes, you're right, Jeremy. Pixar has been in dire straits for the past couple of years because they had, when we went into the pandemic and they decided instead of holding on to some of these movies they had in the works, they were going to use it to try to boost Disney Plus. That was a massive failure for them. That was Luca, Soul, and Turning Red, I believe, were those releases that specifically Pixar had during that time. Then they come out of the pandemic, they release Lightyear. Lightyear was a massive and complete total flop. They blamed it on families not wanting to go to theaters, while I think either Despicable Me 3 or Minions 3 or something made like $1 billion at the box office that very same year, right? Just absolute horse shit cope that they were dealing with. But that movie was promoted and got a lot of news based on the gay relationship that they had in that movie. It certainly got a lot of bad press. That movie made $200 million at the global box office, and they spent $200 million making it and about $100 million promoting it. A massive flop for them.
Yeah, I mean, Lightyear was such I remember when Chris Evans, I can't remember specifically what he said, but Chris Evans essentially had an interview where he was like, oh, if you're intimidated by any of the gay themes in this, then, we don't want you as a customer. And guess what? People listened, and they didn't show up, which they were never going to show up to Lightyear anyway. Lightyear was a bad idea from the beginning. It was never going to work. It didn't fail specifically because there was some gay scene or whatever. But it failed because it was a fucking Lightyear movie without Tim Allen, which the whole premise of it was weird and strange anyway. So it was always going to fail just on the idea alone, but Chris Evans didn't help that narrative at all. But I personally think that this is we are not out of the woods yet, and I think people need to understand that. Just because you're hearing these discussions happening, that doesn't mean that like everything is just going to be immediately fixed. That's not the case at all. But we have been proven right by this report right here, and just the overall performance of Inside Out 2, which whatever. I mean, I consider Inside Out 2 maybe a slightly above average Pixar movie. I don't think it was like the greatest thing we've ever seen, but it was good. It was fine. So this is a good sign of things to come, though.
It is, because like some of the stuff in this report is like super interesting, and essentially it's normal people that have responsibilities and that could get fired if Pixar continues to do poorly are saying, hey, let's stop with the activism. Let's start making stories that are, understandable for anybody, right? We don't have to make it all about identity politics and stuff like that. Let's get back to basics. And I do think there's another thing to talk about in terms of crunch in the animation industry and stuff like that. But personally, what I think, a lot of the people who are out there bitching about all this and bitching about the fact that they weren't allowed to put their activism in, I think it has a lot to do with things that we'd heard from Film Thread, with the D-Files, with this understanding that at both Pixar and at Walt Disney Animated Studios, they've pushed out a lot of the actual talented people. They brought in a lot of people that aren't qualified to be doing what they're doing and were brought in for diversity reasons. Literally, that's what we've heard. So it's not surprising to me that a lot of these people, one, might have a problem with working hard, and two, might have a problem if they're not allowed to push their activism. And this is something that Pixar needed to do because it was not just Lightyear. It was all the things they had during COVID. It was then Lightyear. Walt Disney Animated Studios had a couple failures like Wish and Strange World, which affected people's perception of Disney animated movies. And then Elemental comes out. And as much as people like to talk about Elemental, oh, what an incredible success after a terrible start. It did have a terrible start, but it didn't make money. That's something that needed to hit around $650 million based on that box office split to break even, and it couldn't even crack 500 million. That was also a movie where they bragged about the first non-binary character in a Pixar movie, if you remember that. That was something that was going on. That was a headline. That was something they were bragging about. And then, for them to essentially come in, the people that are in charge, Pete Docter, who's CCO, to come in after a lot of this controversy and say, no, we're not going to do this shit anymore. We're just going to put out stories that are, everyone can appreciate, regardless of whether you're gay or not. For many, it was a symbol of Pixar holding fast to internal culture that stubbornly set in its ways with an aversion to bringing on new directors or voices. One source cites a period of time between 2020 and the release of Lightyear, where the studio was more open to bringing in producers and creators from outside its ranks. That brief period of willingness to experiment, however, didn't last, particularly after Lightyear's financial failure. Pixar lost the desire to take risks, either in its creative appointments or its story decisions. As reported at the time, there were many reasons why Lightyear disappointed at the box office, but multiple sources say Disney leadership internally put a large part of the blame for Lightyear's financial failure on a same-sex kiss in the film, which was briefly removed, then reinstated after an internal staff uproar. And we remember all this going on. The Florida Don't Say Gay bill, which is really the parental rights and education bill, them deciding to remove that kiss, then put it back in when the woke freaks that they fucking hired threw a fit about it. And Bob Chapek, after saying, we don't think we should get involved politically, sits there on his knees looking up at a rainbow-colored gun and begging for forgiveness from all the weirdos that they fucking let run the company.
And this tweet right here puts it into perspective. It's just so simple. Removes the gay, profit. That's simple right there. This is not complicated. It never has been complicated. We've been saying this for years. Just get the bullshit out of there. People want good storytelling. They want good movies. They don't want this agenda-driven bullshit. The fans have been proven right once again. This is not a complicated process at all. Disney has the resources. Disney has the IPs. They have the infrastructure that they can actually make really good movies and really entertaining things if they just get the bullshit out of it. And they have been shooting themselves in the foot for over a decade now with this bullshit. And I mean, you're hearing all types of stuff, whether it's, the stuff with Marvel, obviously the Acolyte got canceled. Now you're hearing this from Pixar. Those are their three big, studios that they have under their banner in terms of the movies, which those movies is what translates of things into the parks. They take whatever these IPs that they grow within the movies, and then they want to create attractions in the park. So this just shows you that they are absolutely recognizing that people like us, people like you in the chat, have been right for years. So we'll see. Do you think that in the next 5 years we're going to see them move away from all of this completely, Ryan?
I do think that now in a couple of these places, I think Marvel, and I think obviously at least someone at Pixar has now realized this. Again, these are different corporations under the Disney umbrella, right? Just because Marvel's doing something doesn't mean that Pixar and Lucasfilm and everyone else is doing it necessarily. And that's something we've heard. We have heard that Marvel's recognized a lot of these failures that they've gone into because of some of the stories they decided to tell, because the focus started becoming more about representation and virtue signaling than it did about telling stories people cared about. That they have recognized that and they want to right the ship. Lucasfilm, not in that fucking same boat. They haven't come to that realization yet, and they likely won't. So it's not, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a company-wide thing, but I think more and more you are seeing. We talked about the kind of the death of DEI as a concept in terms of the word that's being used and having all these people as part of your DEI initiatives. That's become really cancerous lately. At the end of the day, at some point in time, people do care about money. And when it becomes too much of a loss to sustain, that's when you start seeing changes happen. And I think we've started seeing some of those changes. Doesn't mean that, oh, that's it. That's just done now. And doesn't mean that activists won't try to continue to worm their way in. But I do think we've seen a little bit of the pendulum start shifting a little bit back.
We're not going to be mad either way. If you give us good shit to watch, that's good. If you keep, making woke bullshit, then we just have really good content. So either way we win. It's all good on me. So